And we are back here at our second panel discussion for the Diversity Festival. And we are so excited to have our panelists with us today. And they're going to be sharing all their insight and knowledge about diversity and inclusion. And I'm going to present to you my co-host, but also the moderator of this panel, which is Neil Danny. He is the co-founder of Chorus Music Academy, and he is also the musical director at Moksha Canada. So many of you don't know that he is an ethnomusicologist. So hey, Neil.
Hi. I'm doing well, thanks. How about yourself?
Very good. So like I was saying, you do have a master's in ethnomusicology. So can you explain to our viewers what that is?
Sure. I mean, simply put, ethnomusicology is the study of the relationship between music and culture. And one of the things I love about it is that it really broadens your horizons on what music is and can be, and all the different cultures of the world and how rich these cultures are. I started by, studying Western classical music and pop music, and after going to York University for my undergrad, I realized how much there was out there that I didn't know about. I had no idea. And I was like, wow, I've been studying music for so long, and there's so much out there that just went straight past me. And so then during my undergrad, my focus became just learning about all the different types of African music, South Indian music, North Indian music, Latin and Cuban music. You name it, I tried to soak it up because I realized there's so much amazing art out there, so many amazing things that we can learn from different cultures that unless we really open our minds to it and try to absorb all of these things, sometimes we can get caught up in that tunnel vision mentality where we see and understand things that are around us in our day-to-day or in our communities, but learning how other communities operate, what they do, how they do it, what they eat, to me is really interesting. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to study ethnomusicology to really just broaden my understanding of these different cultures and learn how rich these cultures are in doing that.
That is amazing and totally in line with what we are going to be discussing today, because it's all about diversity. It's all about inclusion and ways to include our community. But without further ado, I let you introduce today's panelists.
Sure, my pleasure. So we have three amazing panelists today. I'm really excited to get to speak with them and hear their insights and experiences. Our first panelist is Amrita Kumar-Ratta. Amrita is a multidisciplinary professional. She's a trained theater and dance artist, as well as a social researcher and community facilitator. In addition to being the founder and creator of Shades of Brown Girl, a global storytelling movement, she's the lead consultant at AKR Global Consultants, a firm dedicated to what she calls vocal diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI strategizing. Currently pursuing a PhD in human genetics at the University of Toronto, Amrita is passionate about creating socially inclusive societies. Focuses her work on themes of intersectional feminism and gender equity, migration, mobility, and the diasporic experience, as well as sustainable community development. An active member of numerous planning committees, advisory groups, and community initiatives in the Greater Toronto Area and beyond, she adores social policy research, loves to ask hard questions, and is a firm believer in using arts-based methods to catalyze healing, inspiration, and social change. So, without further ado, let's please welcome Amrita Kumar-Ratta.
Hi there, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to be a part of this virtual festival.
You know what? We're really excited that you're here as well, and we're so thrilled to have you. And I can't wait to hear more about your experiences and the insights you're going to provide to us and the viewers. Just to get started, how did you get involved in doing what you're currently doing, and what sparked that?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's the question, right? So I wear a number of different hats, as your wonderful bio mentioned. And one of the hats that I wear is as a social researcher. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Toronto studying human geography, and for me, it was kind of a natural progression because I've always been very fascinated with the world around me. I've always been very curious about the ways in which community and community development as a process happens. I've always been very curious about the ways in which difference actually manifests in our communities, in our societies. I've also been really interested and fascinated with the ways in which policies and programming and planning kind of protocols and procedures tend to frame the ways in which community development actually happens on the ground. So geography was sort of a natural sort of place for me to expand that interest and knowledge. In addition to being a geographer, or a geographer in training, I should say, I'm an artist educator and I'm a creator. And really, for me, what sparked all of that was because I grew up in a very arts-oriented family. My mother is a classical Indian dancer. She's a Kathak dancer. And my father he's a writer, he's a poet. He's also sort of dabbled in cinematography. So I've always grown up really being supported by my parents and by my family to express myself through the arts, and to use the arts and sort of creative expression as a way of having hard conversations and exploring the world around me and creating that change in ways that in ways that are maybe not possible through other means. So that's kind of, I guess, the answer to that question in terms of what sort of sparked my path, if you will.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing that with us. And I think it's so cool to have parents that are interested in the arts. I think that's a big reason that I kind of took the path that I took as well. My dad was really into music, and my mom is really artistic herself with, interior design and cooking. And I think having that support system, as well as seeing that from a young age, really helps inspire people to pursue what they're interested in and pursue passion. That's awesome. I love that. In terms of diversity and inclusion, which is the theme of this week's panel discussion, I just had a few questions for you.
Sure.
So diversity, inclusion, and equity are commonly used terms these days. Would you please be able to help us understand more about what these terms mean?
Yeah, of course. So that's a huge question, but I'm gonna attempt to sort of try to dig into it, because I know that our other panelists probably have a lot of wonderful insights to sort of add to that as well. Basically, I want to sort of start by saying that these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are, as you said, very popular right now, right? They're sexy, they're trendy. We hear them all the time. Organizations are starting to talk about hiring positions just for diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are conversations that are sort of really popular within the media and within our communities, within organizations. But I want to make a clear distinction between what's popular and what's valued in our societies. Right now, I really do believe that I really feel that, these terms are popular, these conversations are starting to happen, and organizations are starting to dig into these conversations. But I don't feel that we are at the point of really understanding what these terms actually mean, what ideas they represent, and furthermore, what is it about diversity, equity, and inclusion as concepts that are inherently valuable, that inherently important for us to kind of embed into our systems, into our policies, into our organizations. So that kind of, just to sort of set that up, I want to talk a little bit about what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means as terms, but also how we can sort of push the envelope beyond these terms as well, and think about terms, other terms that may be more representative of the kinds of sort of systemic work and more proactive work that I think is necessary. So diversity really just means a variety, right? It's just about difference. It's sort of that first level, that observational level of who is in the room, right? Who is at the table? Who is at the party? Who is being invited to sort of be part of the conversation. It's sort of what we see when we look at a panel discussion, right? Or when we look at a community, or when we look at a city, or when we look at, the board of an organization. And, on the one hand, we can say, for instance, that Canada is, it's hard to dispute the fact that Canada is a very diverse place, right? That Canada is observationally filled with ethnic, linguistic, cultural, religious diversity. The difference is when we get to when diversity as a concept becomes more difficult, is when we think about the ways in which it shows up in our organizations, in our cities, in sort of the leadership that governs our cities and organizations. Is there gender diversity? Is there, a diversity of ages and abilities being represented, right? Is there a diversity of socioeconomic status being represented? Sometimes there is, but in many cases there is not, right? So that's sort of the two sort of things that I think about when I think about the word diversity. When it comes to inclusion, just to kind of roll with the metaphor a little bit, inclusion is about not just being invited to the party or being at the table, but being asked to dance, right? It's about, are you, as somebody that's at the table or that's being invited to the table, do you actually feel like you have a voice? Do you actually feel like you belong at that table, right? We often see organizations and municipalities and even community leadership sort of touting diversity and saying, look at how many amazing diverse people we have around the table. But are those people really being given a chance to communicate their knowledge, to communicate their expertise, to communicate their lived experiences? That's what inclusion is all about. That feeling that not only am I at the table, but I can actually participate, and my experiences and my voice matters. And then when it comes to equity really just means, what are the ways in which we as communities, as systems, as organizations are creating, what are the ways in which we are actually creating opportunities for individuals and communities to be able to not just survive, but thrive, right? So the metaphor that I like to use for equity is, if you have a big pot of soup, right? You're not going to give the same sort of spoon or same portion of soup to the person that, just came back from having a 5-course meal, as you would to the person that, hasn't eaten in days or in months, right? So thinking about the lived experiences of people and communities, and the ways in which certain communities are more marginalized than others, and using that as the sort of the criteria for, well, how and why and what accommodations are we going to ensure that these communities have, so that everyone can get to a place where they can thrive. It's like that baseball game metaphor, right? Where equity is about ensuring that there's actual access. There's an opening for people to be able to watch the game, or to take in that information, or to access opportunities. But equity, and ensuring that equity is, I just want to be clear as well, not the same as, you know, liberation. Liberation is sort of that last, or that hopeful end, that hopeful sort of outcome that we're all hoping for, that, you know, where we don't have to, where there are no barriers in the first place, where there are no systemic barriers that we have to, you know, to tear down. And that's where, and I'm just going to end with this, that's where I really feel we need to push beyond these terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think about terms like anti-racism and anti-oppression, specifically, you know, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, these kinds of things, which really allow us to think proactively about the various systems that continue to oppress and marginalize the various communities that we have in our diverse societies, right? And move beyond sort of reactive diversity, equity, and inclusion policies towards more proactive conversations.
Wow, well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that was a lot of information there to unpack, and I think you're absolutely right that being more proactive with these different areas is definitely the road that we need to travel towards. And how do you think we can do that? What are some of the best practices to get to a place like that? And how can human service organizations adopt these areas in a more proactive way?
Yeah, I mean, so human service sector organizations are at a really, you know, they occupy a really unique place when it comes to moving the dial, excuse me, around equity and inclusion. And that's because they are at the same time, or they're simultaneously sort of tasked with serving the underserved and providing services to the community, providing essential services to the community. But at the same time, human service sector organizations, nonprofit organizations, are some of the most underfunded, under-resourced, and undervalued organizations, or they really occupy a very precarious place within our economy, right? And so I think it's really important as employees of, as customers of, as community members, you know, surrounding human service sector organizations, that we start to talk about the ways in which these organizations have a unique role to play in actually doing the work and actually mobilizing those conversations. Some of the best practices that I've observed and that I've advocated for within the human service sector include, you know, thinking about, like I said, the sector is, you know, widely under-resourced, right? We're talking about, especially now in the kind of context of COVID that we're in right now, we're talking a lot about not just an economic recession, but what's being called a she-cession, right? Which is impacting the human sector, service sector, specifically because there are so many women that are working within the sector and that are implicated by the sector. But I think it's really important to think about the ways in which the human service sector as organizations actually designate resources towards equity and inclusion. And there's a lot of conversations about how, oh, well, because we are so underfunded, because we are so under-resourced, we can't dedicate resources towards equity and inclusion, right? It's coming from a pot of money that we don't have. And I want to challenge that because generally what gets prioritized gets done, right? Or what is valued is what ends up getting what ends up getting prioritized. And so I've seen, you know, small organizations, small human service sector organizations that, you know, use the resources that they do have to be able to move the the dial, whether it's, having champions within the organization, right? Whether it's, creating or developing employee resource groups. So having spaces and creating places for employees who are part of various marginalized communities to feel like, again, to feel like they're included in the conversation. Larger human service sector organizations who have access to resources and infrastructure to be able to take up these conversations can hire, a chief diversity officer or somebody whose sole portfolio it is to work on these issues. But again, I want to stress that, as much as, allocating these resources and creating the space for these conversations through education and training, et cetera, is really important. Diversity training and inclusion training is not the be all and end all, right? If training does not match policies, if training does not match behavior change, then it's all a moot point. So best practices for me include not just training and not just resource allocation, but also that deep commitment to unlearning and to having those conversations, at lunch, by the water cooler, during staff meetings, during social events. I think that's kind of when the behavior change actually starts to happen, and that's when we move from diversity to inclusion and from inclusion to equity. So those are some of the best practices, or some of the strategies that I've seen that have been very useful. But again, I want to stress that we're living in a time in which diversity, equity, and inclusion as concepts A are so sexy, and B, diversity, equity, and inclusion training is like is always what is touted as the answer, right? And while training is important, education is important, awareness is important, if that, as I mentioned, is not matched by policy change and behavior change, ultimately we're going to be in this vicious cycle.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for all of that insight. That's a really great way to look at it for myself too, because I guess I never thought about it in a lot of these ways that you have mentioned, and it really opens people's minds up and eyes to how we can actually really go about making real change, as opposed to just making it popular in the media. Right now it's popular, so maybe you'll have a few people talking about it here and there, but is that going to actually instill change? You're right, it won't. So having these conversations in these ways, that if that's the goal, then that is something that we have to work towards, it being that you'll have these conversations at lunchtime, you'll have these conversations by the water cooler, and it's not just something that you're going to be doing because somebody told you that you had to do it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you for those questions. Really important.
Pleasure. Thank you for answering them so well and providing everybody with such great insight. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure we are going to have some questions for you.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions right now, or did we want
our panelists, if you want to add to the conversation or leave a question in the comments in the chat for Amrita, we could take a look at that as well.
Awesome. So we'll...
Oh, Anu.
Just have a question. Wonderful insights, Amrita. Thank you so much. There was a lot of learning for myself as well. I'm just curious to know, so yourself being a young person working in this sector of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and myself as a mother who is bringing up a youth at home, I would like to know how we can engage our youth, who are going to be future leaders of our society in this country and in the world, to adopt these values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, not making them sexy, but really kind of believing in them and inculcating them as very normal things of life, as normal way of life?
Yeah. No, that's a really great question. And my answer to that is it goes back to the everyday things that we're doing, right? You know, the conversations that we're having around the dinner table, right? The media that we're consuming. So the books that we're making available to our kids, and what those books are about. And are these books just reinforcing stereotypes about, you know, this sort of great multicultural fabric in which we live in, or are they actually giving voice to the voiceless, right? And showcasing the experiences of communities, individuals, children that don't often get the limelight, right? That's very important. TV shows that we're watching, you know, as well as, especially now, again, in this sort of renewed context of awareness around the Black Lives Matter movement and around Black and Indigenous rights and Black and Indigenous oppression within Canada anyway, taking our children to protests, or really, you know, having conversations about why are these protests actually happening, right? What is the reason behind why these protests are happening? Why are there so many community members out? And, you know, what's the significance of behind what's being written on some of these some of the signs that you see outside? Really kind of engaging in what's actually happening out there in the world, because I know that when I was younger, I mean, like I said, I've always been very curious about the sort of diversity of experiences and thought, and particularly, you know, the diverse experiences surrounding me. But it's only recently, really, in the last maybe 10, 12 years, that I've really started to take an interest in and really start to see, like, what are the political events that are happening around me, and how are community members engaging in these events, and why are people so upset when, you know, an Indigenous woman gets killed, right? Why? What's the sort of historical reasoning for that? So having those conversations at the dinner table, or while you're watching a TV show, or watching the news, or reading books, I think is sort of the very best and the very sort of first way to engage in these conversations, so that ultimately our children are curious about, and they ask questions about, and they start to normalize the fact that we all come from different, you know, circumstances. Some are laden or embedded with more power than others, and let's talk about that, right?
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Amrita. That was amazing, and these are definitely the conversations we need to have at an everyday level. So really appreciate your insight, and I'm sure that you gave a lot of people a lot of important information that they may have not had otherwise. So once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome, my pleasure. Moving on to our next panelist, Dr. Dionne Wright Poulton. Dr. Dionne Wright Poulton is Chief Diversity Officer at CARE New England Health System in the state of Rhode Island, where she oversees all diversity, equity, and inclusion endeavors involving over 7,000 employees and many thousands of patients served each year at 3 hospitals and in several healthcare facilities across the system. Dr. Poulton is a leading expert on diversity and inclusion, unconscious bias, and transformational adult learning and behavior, with special emphasis in addressing, mitigating, and solving intercultural conflict and incidents of unconscious bias in the workplace. Dr. Poulton has been featured in Forbes for her work, and she is author of the acclaimed book, It's Not Always Racist, but Sometimes It Is, Reshaping How We Think About Racism. She has also received national and international recognition for her work, training leaders and employees around the world, including across the United States, Canada, France, and Bermuda. She has also been invited for social commentary and ad hoc writing assignments for media outlets in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and is also host of the popular radio show, The Dr. Dionne Show, which focuses on diversity and inclusion in the workplace and beyond. Dr. Poulton holds a PhD in adult education from the University of Georgia, a Master of Arts degree in administration and interdisciplinary studies in adult education with special emphasis in equity and social justice from San Francisco State University, a Bachelor of Education degree from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in kinesiology and health sciences from Rice University. Originally from Toronto, Canada, Dr. Poulton currently resides in Massachusetts with her husband and their 2 daughters. Please welcome everyone, Dr. Dionne Wright Poulton.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so good to be with all of you and to exchange ideas and information and learn from each other. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. We really look forward to speaking with you and hearing your insights on this matter. You have definitely done a lot in this area, and I am so excited to find out more from you. So thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So I have a few questions for you, Dr. Poulton. How successful are we as a country, and this can be from a US perspective or a Canadian perspective or even a North American perspective, I guess. How successful are we in adopting and implementing anti-racism and anti-discrimination framework at various levels?
That's a big question. So I've had the benefit of born and raised in Toronto, and went down to the States for the first time when I was 18. And I'm not going to share my full age, but I've been down here for 3 decades, back and forth. So I've had the benefit of straddling both countries. And so there are a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences. And I think just to kind of, to look at both countries, Canada and the US, I would say that both are well-intentioned and are trying to do their best to make sure people are included. I think just my experience and also growing up in Toronto, I know that it's a very rich and diverse place. But when you do get outside of the cities, you do see more of different segregations. For example, I know that sometimes you go up to North and York region, there are different pockets of people that live in the different spaces. So so while I think there's that Canada is much more diverse in terms of different people and being able to drive for 15 minutes and get Indian food or get Jamaican food, or it's not necessarily that way here. But I think for the most part, I think both countries are grappling with how do we really include everybody. And so you use the word inclusion in the last question. So for me, inclusion is, are people feeling like they belong? And is the table set for them to be included? And do people actually want to come back and actually be involved in what's happening? And it's a very difficult thing to balance. One thing that I think Canada does very well, that I think the US needs to adopt, and I've been saying this for years, is the fact that Canada has designated hate speech. You can't just say whatever you want about any particular group of people. And that doesn't exist here. So there's that fine line between hate speech and freedom of speech. But I do believe that you're the what you think translates to what you do, and that it impacts your actions. So I really firmly believe that in terms of the US, they can follow Canada's lead and implementing hate speech. And it's there, but it's not adopted the way that it should. So I said this publicly, so I think we're all familiar with the woman in Central Park who had the dog off leash and then made a phone call and basically said that she's going to be harassed or something, or attacked by a Black man. She was charged, but that was a hate crime. And I would really believe that if that happened in Canada, that would have been considered a hate crime as opposed to a misdemeanor. So there's definitely strengths and weaknesses in both countries. I think one thing that I think Canada can definitely do better is also what kind of penalties or what kind of consequences do people do when they actually are found to be acting with racial motivations. What are the consequences? So I know in the US, you know, there's a huge deterrent, which is money. I mean, people get paid millions of dollars for lawsuits when they claim discrimination. It's proven. It's a far cry from what people can gain in Toronto. And I'm not saying this is a moneymaker or it's what people should be looking for, but I think if people get hit in the pocket, then that deters behaviors. And I'll just add one more thing to that is the caveat is that not everyone believes that Canada does have an issue with race. I've been talking to some of my friends since the George Floyd incident, and we know that was a worldwide, just, you know, we all individually and collectively witnessed a murder, and essentially we did. I've never seen one in my life. And so everyone is just grappling with, okay, what did we just see here? And it moved beyond race. It moved into what is right and wrong here? What is going on here? And so I'm really excited about the movement that I'm seeing. But I'm sharing that because I'm delighted that I think, of course, going back and forth between countries and doing work up in Toronto as well, as opposed to, and also in the US, I think there's more of an appetite now in Canada to really, really acknowledge that, okay, there's stuff going on here. I know that I think 2 weeks ago, there was something called, they assembled it called the Black North. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, where a whole bunch of heads of organizations came together. They had their own summit, and they're really, really addressing anti-Black racism because it is an issue, and it has been an issue. But I think now people are really starting to understand, you know what, there are people on the margins that have been on the margins. My parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago back in the early 60s. And there are times where I can go to the Eaton Center, I'm looking on the television, and I don't see any Black people in the commercials. I don't see their faces in the signs. So I think this has really brought it to the forefront, and I'm hoping that everyone is now going to really, really be get the attention that it deserved and the opportunities that are deserved.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That's incredible, and I mean a lot of amazing points there, and a lot to think about. Definitely, I didn't consider that difference in the hate speech element that you had mentioned from America and here in Canada, but that is a big difference, and that's something that speaks for itself, right? I mean, if that issue with the lady complaining about the dog happened here, I do feel like there would be much more of an uproar about it, because it is hate speech, and I'm glad that we have something in place here in Canada that protects people from that. And I don't know too much about this area, but I don't understand why that wouldn't be something that's incorporated everywhere around the world. So a lot of progress to be made.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I think there definitely needs to be some progress made there for sure. We need to put filters on people's thinking. You can't legislate people's thinking, but you can definitely have laws that say, you know what, these are the limits. This is how far you can go. But we have to make sure we have parameters around behaviors. Otherwise, people can just, people have free reign. So, which is not a good thing.
Exactly, and let me know if I'm wrong about this, but I feel that element of freedom of speech, it's a lot in my mind related to the right to bear arms, right? It's fighting for that thing that you had for so long that you don't want to let it go. And because you don't want to let it go, you almost become more hostile as a way to combat that potential reality of things changing, right? And I think that's very important, because when these systems are in place, you can't change how someone thinks, but by having a law in place that says there's a certain limit to how you can act, hopefully that even subconsciously will help change people's thinking. Whereas that's something that's non-existent in the States. And so as soon as a conversation like that comes up, people get very adamant about protecting their rights and protecting their ability to speak their mind.
Yes, and which is unfortunate. But in the context of workplace, so in my role as Chief Diversity Officer, the first thing that I did, taking that position, is speaking to we're talking about what should be looking at. It's okay, what does the leader do? What does the leader think? The leader is going to dictate the environment and the outcome of the culture. So when I took this job, I asked the the CEO of all the hospitals. And I said, is this a figurehead position or am I going to be able to do my job? And he was taken aback. And he said, what do you mean? And what I meant was, am I just here as it was described earlier? Am I just here at the table just because, hey, look at me, blackface or whatever? Or am I going to have a voice? And it was very, very important for me to ask that question. And I got the answer. And so luckily, he has been true to his word, because when the George Floyd incident happened, here we have 7,000 employees, all of diverse backgrounds, who witnessed what happened. Okay, now what do we do? Do we go to work and do we pretend like nothing happened, which I don't believe is a good thing. I think we can't check what's happened in society at the door. We should be having open discussions, especially if we're all diverse and we believe in diversity. So I was able to put out a statement, and we ended up having a town hall, an anti-racism town hall, shortly after the incident, and had over 800 employees show up on Zoom, and having a candid conversation about these issues. And so it's definitely important that these conversations need to continue, and not just be, oh, this has happened, now let's let things fade away. But we should continue these conversations, and also recognize again that there's things also beyond race. There's we have the gender diversity, we have language that was already shared. So it's a big deal to make sure that we're looking at not just individual people and groups, but also the intersectionalities of their identities, and to make sure everyone's being valued equally for who they are, and want to come to work and want to feel included. So that's a big part of my job that I take very seriously.
Wow. How did you get involved, actually, if you don't mind me asking, with what you're doing now?
So ironically, I started my career working for TDSB. I worked for Toronto District School Board, and really? I was actually born and raised, grew up in Jane and Finch. Whoa! Nope. And when I say Jane and Finch, people say, "Oh, Jane and Finch," but I grew up in Jane and Finch, and I purposely went back to the high school. I went to C.W. Jeffries, but I ended up teaching at Westview Centennial. And so long story short, when I started teaching, I did my undergrad in kinesiology, as I shared, and but I'd already worked at Eva's Place, which is a shelter for street youth in the city. And I've always had a bleeding heart for people who are just marginalized and underdogs, so to speak. So long story short, the principal at the time asked me to take over an unruly class of grade 9 boys, who had gone through 3 other teachers. I took over the class, and the last teacher whose class I inherited, she said, "Oh, these kids are animals. Good luck with them," basically. And I'm thinking, you're calling children animals? That's bizarre. So at the end of the school year, I ended up winning Rookie of the Year. And I share that because the teacher who described them as animals came to me at the end of that school year, because all the kids did well. And she said to me, "You did well with those kids because you're Black and because you're pretty." And I said, "Huh." I said, "So how do you explain the fact that the white kids did well, the Hispanic kids did well, the Asian kids did well?" I said, "I must be really pretty." And what was ironic is the woman who said that, she had a limp, and she walked with a limp and was complaining that people were prejudging her. So this is like early, like mid to late 90s. So this was kind of made me start to realize, okay, what's happening in this transaction, in this exchange between teacher and student? Because the students did well in my classes, not because I lowered my standards, but maybe it was my perceptions of them. And so that led me to that area. And I'm doing my master's degree looking at multicultural comfort levels in the classroom. And then just by chance, I created a workshop for a conference, a teacher education conference in early 2000s. And it was called Think You're an Unbiased Teacher, Think Again, which is essentially was unconscious bias at the time, and facilitated it. I had like 45 people asked me to come and do trainings with them after the fact. And I was teaching at Spelman College at the time. I said, you know what, I'm going to quit my job. And I went back to UGA, and they allowed me to use that workshop as my research base. And so I graduated in 2011 and just started my own business, and I've had great success as a consultant in different industries. But I decided to go back into an actual entity because I realized that I was doing great work, but I wasn't able to see the fruits of my labor. Like after I go in and do a training or something, or help with policies or something, I didn't quite see the results. And so now being in-house, for the last 2 years at different entities, I can now see the fruits of my labor and see the outcomes and see the impact that I'm having. So that's sorry, it was long-winded, but that's how I got into this.
That's
it kind
amazing.
of chose me. It kind of chose me. I didn't choose it.
Wow, that's incredible. That's so inspiring too. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing, and congratulations for all your achievements and all your success, because you're doing that while making such a difference for so many people. So it definitely must be extremely rewarding as well, and you're clearly doing great work. So it's greatly appreciated by those people who you've helped and by all of us. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sunil.
You're welcome. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Poulton? Yeah, Anu?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Poulton. Amazing, wonderful, valuable insights. I'm just curious, since your bio mentioned you have spent so much time in the healthcare sector. So I would like to know about how equity relates to the healthcare sector. I know I'm going back to the initial discussion of equity and inclusion and diversity. What is health equity? And then based on your experience, share with us, like, what are some of the best practices when it comes to really implementing equity in the healthcare sector?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I describe my role looking at two types of barriers. I look at the systemic barriers that exist. So I look at, okay, so what policies and procedures are in place across all the hospitals, and what's there that's kind of recreating or perpetuating inequities. So, for example, in one of our hospitals that is right in the middle of Providence, Rhode Island, which is it's like 70-80% minority, and I discovered that people were being charged. This is actually a women's hospital. It's called Women and Infants. It's a baby hospital. People deliver their babies, and I discovered early on that the residents were being charged just to tour the hospital. And so that was a recommendation I made very quickly. That's an example of a barrier to access. It's a barrier access because it's a barrier to access. So if people are having to choose between paying their light bill or paying to tour a hospital, and knowing that they're going to have the copay and then also have a bill after the fact, what are they going to choose? So it's those kind of things that I look at and try to find a way to not to necessarily do away with, because we are nonprofit and we're supposed to be hospitals, but so our goal is not to make money, but we have to make money to sustain ourselves. But that's an example of looking at the systemic barriers and the policies that exist. And then the other type of barrier I look at is the cognitive barriers, which is looking at unconscious biases. So looking at microaggressions, how they play out, and again, how do those eventually funnel down to the type of care that different types of people are experiencing. And so, there's always issues. But one thing that I'll say that's a big thing in health disparities right now is that 1 in 4, if you depend on who you talk to, 1 in 3 or 4 Black women actually die in childbirth in the United States. And it's not because we're biologically different. It's tied to the treatment. It's tied to C-section rates. It's tied to biases, and that's an example of that's one big thing that I've been helping to kind of address at one of the hospitals, or 2 of the hospitals actually. So I hope that answers your question. And if I can share one more thing regarding the parenting, I wanted to share that I always ask the question, is your world full of lookalikes? And so I ask that question, meaning, whose house do you go to for dinner? Who comes to your house for dinner? Who's your doctor? Who's your dentist? Who's your lawyer? Who's your accountant? And if all those people look the same, then you've created a life that's monolithic and your children are watching you. And so the best way that we can teach our kids is by having diverse people, not just racially, but all across the spectrum, so that they're learning from us and they're demonstrating to us what's important. And I will share that's how I was raised with my parents. And growing up in Toronto, I had every type of person coming out of my house, and that's how I was taught about how to value all people, regardless of who they are. So I wanted to throw that in there.
Wow, that's an amazing point, actually, and thank you so much. I didn't think about it, but that's so true, because what you're creating your reality to a certain extent, right, and shaping that reality by all the people that are around you. And if everybody around you looks like you, that becomes your reality. That becomes your normal, and everything else becomes everything else, the rest, right? And so I think that's very important. And looking back, even growing up myself, I lived in Toronto as well, close to Jane and Finch. I lived at Kipling and Steeles.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, that's where I grew up. And so for myself, so it's always cool to meet people, whether virtually or in person, who, I know where C.W. Jeffries is, right? So I get that connection with you right there from the start. But growing up, my best friends I had Filipino best friends, Indian best friends, Jamaican, all of us on the street, we all hung out together, and we saw no difference. We didn't see color because we were like a rainbow, right? We were all the colors of the rainbow playing baseball on the street every day. And all I saw is, these are my friends, right? And I get to go to their house and have cool food that I don't have at my house every day of the week. So it's a bonus. And I think from when I was young, I really loved learning about and from different cultures. And that's what inspired me, I think, to go down the ethnomusicology road. But that's so true, that if you, as parents, you shape what your kids are learning, and it can be something as small as, who's my doctor, who's my accountant, who do we, all the people that you see on a daily basis. That is so important to shaping a more diverse or multicultural mindset and an inclusive mindset. So thanks so much for that insight. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. All right. Well, that was Dr. Dionne Wright Poulton, everyone. And I'm sure that we're going to have some more questions for all of our amazing panelists moving forward. But I do want to introduce now our third panelist of this discussion. I'd like to introduce Mr. Venki Raman, who is the founder and CEO of VR Pace Inc., an executive and performance coaching company that helps entrepreneurs and professionals unleash and achieve their full potential. After 25 great years at CIBC, where he was a vice president, leading national teams of over 1,500 people to great success consistently over the years, he decided to retire early to form VR Pace Inc. His mission is now to kindle the human spirit through PACE, which stands for Purposeful Action, Controlled Execution. He helps entrepreneurs and professionals like you and I achieve our fullest potential in what we do. While at CIBC, apart from being a top producer and executive, Venki has been a champion of inclusion and diversity. He was a member of CIBC's National Steering Committee on Inclusion and Diversity, and also the executive sponsor for the International Professionals Network and the CIBC South Asian Network. He has been passionate about helping newcomers to Canada, mentoring over 1,000 immigrants to success. He also contributes time to various organizations like the TRIEC, United Way, Youth Employment Services, and hospitals. He's on the advisory board for the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and Venki was also awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for his contribution and positive impact on the local community. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Venki Raman.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's a pleasure for me to be here and also to be in this amazing panel. So thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you so much for being here. It's my pleasure. It's all of our pleasure here, and we're really looking forward to speaking with you and hearing your amazing insights and experiences. So I'll go ahead and get started with a question for you. Why is cultural competence and sensitivity relevant in human services organizations?
Absolutely, very, very relevant, right? Having worked in the private sector, I mean, if I could touch upon the concept of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and then tied to the cultural competence.
Sure.
So what it is, diversity is about being unique. I mean, your mom, when you were born, told you that you are unique. And every one of our moms told us that we were unique. So you got to celebrate that. That's the uniqueness about diversity. And, then you take it forward. I love the way Amrita and Dr. Poulton talked about, integration being made to feel welcome, right? You want to come back. That's inclusion, right? So there has to be a magnetic power that brings you back. Then you are engaged. So in corporations, we talk a lot about, corporations are finally human organizations. And as you know, the world today is very diverse. Canada especially is a very diverse country. And so it's very important for people to come in, not just, as Amrita said very eloquently right in the beginning, it can't be a, check the box kind of a policy, or, you do the training and you be done with it. You got to actually follow through. And I love the way Dr. Poulton talked about, the various ways in which you can get that through. In corporations, we always struggle, and it's a struggle, I will say, to get these people, to get everybody included. And we talk a lot about employee engagement, because employee engagement contributes to productivity, and productivity leads to profits for organizations. So finally, organizations have realized that investing in diversity and inclusion and bringing equity in place is actually profitable, actually makes more money for corporations. And not only that, it, of course, it uplifts and creates a better society for us, right? So the piece about the equity piece is where I would say the bigger struggle is in corporations. So whether you look at, gender equality, right? There is a lot of gap. And we all know that there is a huge gap in that. Whether you talk about ethnicity and race, there is again a huge gap in that as well. You talk about age, there is a gap in that. We talk about abilities, different abilities, again, there is a gap in that piece. Sexual orientation, there is a huge gap in that. And there is a lot of bias going on. And so the piece about the unconscious bias is to kind of make sure, finally, an organization will be successful based on leadership. And I know we said, you got to walk the talk. So you got to get these leaders to really, not just as both the panelists very aptly put, not just kind of laid down in paper and pen or whatever, but you got to create a culture. And that's the piece that you're getting at, right? So that cultural competence has got a broader meaning, I would say. You got to touch upon all of this. And when you create that competence, and when you create the competence on inclusion, on equity, and create that beautiful feeling of, coexistence, which is really what every religion, every spiritual organization, your mom and dad, your grandparents, everybody taught you from childhood, love their neighbor, be good. As you said, you were talking about, how you grew up with friends from different ethnicities. You never had any discrimination. What happened? Suddenly we popped up and we grew up in size and boom, we are discriminating. And all this stuff about hate and everything is going on. So we got to kind of narrow that gap, and the leadership piece creates a very important thing. So you got to walk the talk. So in corporations, we really take it to the leadership. All our unconscious bias training, all our inclusion training is all about getting leaders to reflect that they are actually shedding their biases. And to both our panelists' point, modern corporations today, and I'm so happy to see that in action, having been an ethnic minority person who became an executive in a big bank, I can see that those those leaders are actually leading with some integrity. And I'm very optimistic about the future because I see the younger generation actually shedding all of that. And I'm very, very thrilled and optimistic about the future because I think we've got that magic formula happening with the younger generation where they're saying, forget all this baggage is out. This is the way we're going to be. We're all one, and we're going to love each other, respect each other, whether it is by age or ability or sexual orientation or whatever, what have you. In every way, we are going to be together, which is why I love this movement, whether Black Lives Matters, Pride Parade, you name it. All of that creates that energy, and that is really what is going to lead us to a better world and a better place as we go forward. So why is cultural competence important? It's very important because you're about to create a better world when you inject that competence right around you, in everybody. Once you create that in leaders and influencers of society, and if everybody role models that, and I love that piece that both of our former speakers talked about, what happens in the dinner table and what happens with kids in a subtle way. If you make a remark, or if you're with your body language, if you communicate that you don't appreciate it, you're done. You've given the wrong message to your kids or to any other influenceable young person. So it's so important for all of us to do that. And that is why that cultural competence is very important. And we need to keep investing in it. And we need to keep reiterating it. I think one of the things I would say as a final piece on this is we got to get past the thing about, okay, saying that this is a nice thing to have. And it's got to move to it's absolutely needed to have. So at PACE, what I'm trying to do is, as I coach executives and leaders, I'm trying to also inculcate and create that mindset in them, which is exactly what I did. Hopefully, I played a small part as I was leading a larger team in my former organization.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that insight. And you're so right. It's the leadership that is going to really play a big role in influencing positively the people that they're leading, right? And so that's a very important aspect of it, because those leaders, depending on how many people they have that they are leading, those are all people that can have their mindset changed, unlearn and relearn what is necessary, and not something that is just, this would be nice, but no, this is necessary, this is needed, and it's unacceptable any other way. And I think that's amazing that through VR PACE that you're helping the leaders so that they can help others and help kind of create this chain reaction where in the future, I agree that it is looking definitely more positive than ever before, that we're on the road to some sort of progress. And I think you're absolutely right when you say, the younger generation, a lot of these biases, and I see it especially with sexual orientation, just as an example, from when I was in school to now. I mean, I teach music to a lot of students, and they vary in age from, really young kids to people in university and college. And the shift that you can see even from these kids, it's amazing. You can see that there is progress being made. And just from this, I would say 15-year period or 10-year period from when I was in high school or elementary school to seeing this new generation, it's a completely different environment. And they're so much more accepting, especially of sexual orientation. I found that it's normal. It's completely normal. Everything is, it's fine, that no matter how someone is, you're going to treat them the same way. Whereas when I was in school, that wasn't necessarily the case. A lot of people, if they were gay or they were something different than the norm, then they were keeping that under tabs. They were keeping that, either hiding it because they didn't know the repercussions of coming out would have. And that really sucks, is plainly the way to put it, that they weren't able to be their true authentic self because they didn't know if they were going to be loved and respected for that. But that is something that is so crazy in my mind, and I'm glad that, you know, the kids have completely kind of squashed that. And I see it, you know, day to day, and I'm so happy that we're on that road. And I think you're absolutely right that it's the influencers, it's the leaders, and in a lot of cases these days, the social media influencers are leaders for the youth and for the kids. And you see that they're so quick to squash anything that's anti any other sexual orientation. And so it's great that this is being done at a leadership level, and from that it's being injected and instilled into the minds of the next generation, which is super important. So thank you so much. Those are amazing points.
You're very welcome. I would just say this, right? If you're going to respect, it all comes down to respect, right? You respect everything, right? We are all here created by nature, right? And we all share the planet. And I think the COVID piece is teaching us a good lesson to respect nature, right? We respect nature, we coexist, and we get through this journey of life, as we call it. Why wouldn't we respect each other's differences and uniqueness? That is what diversity is all about. And in doing so, we are going to have a great life. We'll all be able to chill out together, you know, have a ball, right? Have better employee engagement. That's what I used to say to my team when I had a national team coast to coast. I would say, what's the big deal, guys? Everybody chill out, you know, go have a ball, enjoy it, you know, emote with everybody. And what will that do? That'll create, first of all, it'll create more engagement. You'll be able to respect your clients. Your clients will be magnetized, and you'll attract more clients. So therefore, that means you'll increase your business. Your brand reputation will go up. The globe, you'll be able to reach the globe. And that's innovation, whatever. You know, all of that comes from a simple concept of just respecting your fellow human being. I just thought I'll throw that in for.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you so much. That's amazing. The goal for everyone is to be able to have a ball, no matter how old they are, where they're from, what they do, who they like. That's the goal, right? Everybody just wants to have a ball. So that's great. Thank you so much. And you know what? This is really what we're trying to do and promote through the Moksha Canada Foundation as well, is, you know, sharing with other people. That's what this diversity festival is all about, is putting everybody at the same place, showcasing every form of art as equally valuable and something that you can learn from regardless of what your main practice is. You can learn from everything. And, you know, anybody who tells me otherwise, I would have to disagree with them, because there's so much learning that can happen even from the arts and from different food. We're all, you know, the way I like to think of it too is when we're cooking, other than, you know, geographically different types of food that may not be accessible by all of us, we all use potatoes, we all use tomatoes, we all are the same, but what we do with these things are different. And we can learn so much from that difference and celebrate that difference, as opposed to doing anything else with it, which to me makes no sense. And that's really through the Diversity Festival. That's what the Moksha Canada Foundation tries to do and promote. That look at all the rich culture, heritage, and amazing people we have in the world. Let's love everyone for who they are and just have a ball. So that is awesome. Thank you so much for that. I have one more question for you as well. And I think you did touch up on it with your discussion of leadership and how important that is. But if I may ask, what is anti-oppression framework and how can it be adopted at various levels of organizations?
Yeah, you know what? That's a very important thing, and it can happen due to various reasons, right? And you know, corporations and when I say corporations, most structured organizations have an anti-oppression framework, and it involves communication, it involves you know, leadership, and it also involves a set of rules and disciplinary action should some oppressive acts take place. Very, very important, because you know, you need to have a deterrent in order to kind of regulate, right? If there was no stop sign or red light, everybody would be thinking that they rule the road, and then you would have chaos. So similarly, in organizations, we need to have in structured organizations, and in you know, and in social non-structured organizations, there are norms you create, right? And those norms are you know, have an inbuilt thing about anti-oppression. Why is it very important? Again, goes back to exactly what we were talking about. All of us have touched upon it in various ways. If you want to be truly respectful to a human being, you cannot oppress. We are all created equal in this planet. And we all kind of are travelers who just kind of reside in this planet for just a temporary period of time, finite period of time. From dust to dust is what it is all about. And, you know, and during that time, we create all these complexities and mess up our fabric by creating hate, etc. All these emotions actually destroy that human being more than the others, right? Hate actually destroys the person who's hating more than the person that is receiving that. Because if I choose to ignore that gift, then the gift is returned to the sender, right? That's really what it is. So, you know, it's very, very important. Having said that, you know, we need these deterrents. We need a framework for us to operate, because there are people, as we do this, even unconsciously, sometimes we may make a statement that is oppressive to the recipient. So you touched upon sexual orientation, that you could, you know, people could make a joke and that could be offending a person whose orientation is different from the one that is speaking. So there are lots of things. So in corporations, in organizations, we always have a framework, and we always have an alert system, and we always have a means to communicate and find out what really took place. And if there was hate and if there was malice established, we could take punitive action. And to what Dr. Poulton said at the very outset, Canada, Canadians should be very proud that as a country, we have very good framework for anti-oppression. We have a very strong framework for anti-oppression. And following that lead, many corporations, legislation has also empowered that. Okay, so therefore there is empowering happening because of legislation. Furthermore, the legislation also requires corporations and organizations of all kinds to adhere to these. So therefore, we have I would say, in the world's eyes, I think Canada has a very good framework, starting from the government and ending with the common person. We have a very good framework for anti-oppression. It is very important, which is why I would argue, and you know, when I say I would argue, I do this. You mentioned TRIAC, which is and mentoring. I contribute a lot to attracting good quality immigrants into Canada. So I always argue Canada should be able to attract the best of the talent from the world. And as we continue in our journey, as we are now, I think we are going to become more and more of a magnet to attracting the best immigrants in the world to come and reside in Canada. Because of this, if as an organization or even you as a business person, if you have a good framework and you embrace diversity, you are inclusive as an organization, and you create that, promote and create and exude that equity, you're going to find that you're going to be able to attract more and more people and more talent. So therefore, the way I look at it is this is necessary in order to not only have a good, harmonious relationship within the organization, and the organization will come and live its purpose and become more attractive and a better human organization.
Wow, thanks so much. So see, it's clearly a win-win. It's just a matter of getting to that point, and I'm optimistic of what the future holds. I hope that we have these dialogues and we do these things on a daily basis at the dinner table, at lunch. We have all different types of friends and that don't all look like us. And we appreciate each other for these differences. We celebrate these differences and we learn more of ourselves as well by being more open and accepting, and hopefully the leaders as well can push this forward. I think I have been seeing this myself, especially on social media, these social media influencers kind of preaching to the youth, and you're seeing that the youth and the kids are letting go of a lot of these things that people have held on to. And I think that unlearning is taking place, especially in the next generation, but it's important for all of us to go through that unlearning and relearning process to create a more diverse, inclusive, and happy, healthy society. So thank you so much for that, Mr. Raman. That was amazing. And I just want to open up the floor to any questions from anyone here.
Well, I just want to say that I really appreciated everybody on the panel. This is such an important thing to be a part of the festival. And this is my third year being a part of this festival. And I really feel like having people with knowledge share their experience and insight is so eye-opening, because I learned something different from each and every one of you today. And I feel like this is something that needs a platform. And when we do Toronto Diversity Festival next year in person, I feel like we should have a panel take place on the stage, because I feel like people need to listen and engage and connect. And I think this was just an awesome panel. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to touch on what you said, Neil, because with the social media, I do find a lot of influencers are taking their voice and using it in a great way. And I'm actually learning a lot on social media. I recently learned about femicide in Turkey, because influencers are using the platform to create trends and viral trends and posting pictures, but leaving information. And that's for you, Anu, too, because your daughter can be online, but if there's a willingness to learn, I've learned so much. The Black Lives Matter movement was also a big one, and also the Vogue Challenge. And there's so many different things that have a bigger meaning that we're not aware of. So social media has been great as well to share this message.
Coming from a social media influencer herself.
No, but I actually do learn from others. And I thought what Amrita said as well about like how it's sexy now, and it's very true, because it's popularized, and it's almost like it feels like you have to check a box, and we see this as well, Neil, as artists and in entertainment. Oh, we need this type of person, and it's not right. When you really reflect on it, it is not right. And even Dr. Poulton, what you said well, you know, the people that surround us. And, you know, we have to have an open mind to know who we're communicating with, because a lot of groups stick together and we don't even realize we're doing it. So, and, you know, Venki, what you said about, you know, our generation, it is bright. I think there is a bright future. And if we keep learning and building the awareness and getting the right people to spread their message, I think we're in the good place. Definitely.
And I think it's so cool, Nadia, just to touch upon what you said with social media. I mean, these kids are on their phones all day, right? And they see something and they respond to it right away. And so I think it's great that the conversation now on social media is hashtag BLM, is learning about the femicide in Turkey, because this is going to raise awareness and it's going to instill this sense of diversity, inclusion, equality in the kids and the youth, because they see it and they respond to it immediately. And it's amazing that the influencers are influencing the youth and the kids, and sometimes the influencers are youth or kids, and seeing that they're really living these things to us that, you know, are trendy and sexy right now, but they're actually living it as a reality. And I think that's going to have amazing positive implications moving forward for sure. So thank you so much for that as well, Nadia. And I just want to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions at all from anything that you heard from our panelists. And any of our panelists here today, feel free to answer and provide your insight. Any questions?
Hi there. My name is Lynn McEntee. I'm actually delighted to be here today, so thank you for letting me sit in and be a part of this panel today. I come from the different backgrounds in terms of teaching, so speaking to Dr. Poulton's point as well, and Amrita as well, working in the arts and working in business as well. So currently, I just wanted to thank you for touching on all those points. I would like to ask all the panelists, how have you seen the progression of inclusion, if you will, in education in even just the past 5 years in Canada and in Ontario, pardon me, or even in the States as well. So how have you seen inclusion be progressive in the past 5 years in business, arts, and education? Please and thank you.
I can start, I guess, in answering that question. So based on, you know, what I've observed over the past, let's say 5-7 years or so, in terms of education, you know, when I was a student in the Peel District School Board, and you know, when I was a student in high school, even middle school, elementary, did all of those three things in the Peel District School Board. And, you know, I've observed that from that time until now, I mean, that's way more than 7 years, but in that time, what I've observed is that there are more anti-racist educators. There are more conversations happening around, you know, how do we actually embed anti-racism and anti-oppression into the curriculum. There are starting to be conversations about how do we decolonize the curriculum, right? When I was a student, there was none of that. There were no conversations. And I mean, I'm speaking as I was a part of the school board as from the student perspective, you know, there were no conversations about what does this mean from the perspective of, or what does this mean in a historical perspective, right? There were no conversations, you know, within you know, a history class about what is Canadian history, and you know, how do we actually talk about it? What are the implications of our history for the ways in which community members live today, right? And the ways in which our systems and societies have developed and evolved today. But what I see now within the education system, in terms of both being, you know, an educator and a student within post-secondary environment within the university, I see that there's a shift there. There is a shift in terms of, you know, there is a greater embeddedness of critical anti-racist thought and thinking within the education system. Do I think we're at the point that we need to be? No, I definitely think that we need to challenge. It goes back to our original conversation around what is diversity, what is equity, and what is inclusion, right? I think we are starting to see a lot more diversity within the education sector in terms of who teachers are and what intersectional experiences that they bring, using the language that Dr. Poulton, you know, gave us. But I think that we need to go further in terms of really challenging the assumptions upon which our curriculum is built, and the kinds of experiences that are normalized, and the kinds of histories that are normalized. So I think we're getting there, but I think that we have a lot further to go. Just a few weeks ago, or even less than that, maybe 10 days ago, there was an article in the Toronto Star about a young queer racialized educator who, you know, launched a human rights complaint, I believe, and there, you know, just suffered a lot of backlash as a result of it. And so, you know, there's a lot of work that I feel still needs to be done, but we're making slow progress. You know, now if you see any educator coming out or you know, putting on blackface, we talk about it, right? There's an uproar around it. That wasn't the case when I was in school. People put on blackface all the time, and it wasn't questioned, right? So yeah, I think we are making slow progress, but there's definitely more progress that needs to be made. And then in terms of you know, what I've observed in terms of the arts or the creative industry, similarly, I think what's exciting about where we are right now as in terms of arts and culture and performance and creativity and arts education is that there is more representation from diverse artists with diverse experiences and identities. But what I think is lacking is that, you know, that the mere fact that there are more diverse artists and that there are more diverse creators out there does not always translate into their stories and their work and their experiences actually being acknowledged and actually being given business. And I think we saw that a lot with some of the, you know, the social media commentary around Black Lives Matter, right? And how businesses, artists, creators within the Black community aren't being valued. They're not being acknowledged. And it's high time that creators, businesses, artists, entrepreneurs within these historically marginalized communities, their work is actually taken seriously, and it's not relegated to the background, because I still feel as though that's generally what's happening, which means that every time you see a story about you know, that's centered on the Black community within the media, or that's centered on the brown community, or that's centered on, you know, a historically marginalized community, the members of that community get so excited because they don't see these stories so often. They don't see that representation as much as it needs to be seen. So again, I think we're making slow progress, but we still have a lot of work to do.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lynn, for that question.
I can comment on that. So in the last 5 years, I think it's been interesting. One thing I love, and whenever I go to an event in Toronto, the fact that there's acknowledgement that the land that we're occupying, the Native Indigenous people's land, and so there's that acknowledgement is huge, and that does not happen down here in most places in the U.S. So just that acknowledgement of just taking that moment to say, you know what, there were some atrocities that took place that allowed us to be here, and that kind of sets the tone for whatever's happening after that. So people were reminded, okay, you know what? We're not just takers. We shouldn't just be takers. We shall be thinking about what we've been doing, or how did we get here in the first place. So I think I love that mindset of just setting the tone that way and making us be cognizant all the time that we're in a position of privilege, and we've gotten here at the expense of other people. So I love that huge difference that I've seen. The other thing is I love to, I think I saw a statistic yesterday. I think it said that I think now they said 51% of the population, and I might be, I don't know if maybe it's the US or Canada or just North America, but it said 51% of the population are now under 40 years old. 51%. So the majority of the population is now under 40. And so, which is incredible. And then that kind of thing, I think it ties to what Nadia was saying and the whole social media has been just incredible and amazing. Like there's no silos, there's no boundaries, you know, it's one world now. And so we're able to see what's happening in Turkey and other places. And so this whole social justice movement has really forced us to experience and to also acknowledge the differences that we see. So it's a welcome byproduct that I've seen. And then just to go back to the George Floyd incident and the murder, that really just took it to an even another level, where it just kind of really, really opened the door for us to have really, really authentic conversations about the experiences that people have, and not all people of color have the same experiences. And as I said before, that I think it's now more than just, it's come down to right and wrong. And that's why I think we're seeing so many different types of people that are marching in the streets still, how many months after the incident, because we're now recognizing, you know what, it's not helping us to be exclusionary. It's not helping us to not be loving everybody and to acknowledging that if someone is experiencing injustice over here, we could be next. So we need to make sure we're looking after each other. So in that regard, it's been really, really refreshing to be in this space and to help facilitate that with people of all backgrounds and nationalities. So.
Yeah, I'll just
an interception for a moment before Venki. And I guess that it speaks to exploring what it means to be a world citizen, really.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Poulton. Really appreciate your insight. And thank you so much again, Lynn, for the question. And Mr. Raman, please, if I know you had something to say as well.
Yeah, to Lynn's question, you know, without repeating what has been said by Amrita and Dr. Poulton, just wanted to say this: the solution to whether it is in education or arts or any of or business, the solution to this, one key thing, and this is, if we truly want to create organizations that promote diversity, inclusion, and equity, we got to start measuring these things. And the whole thing is in life, whether you look at your blood pressure, or your heart rate, or you look at the number of steps you take, or whatever it is, whatever you got to measure. There's mathematics coming in everywhere in life. The numbers are always going to be there. So there is a common saying in business is, if you can't measure, you can't manage, right? So for example, I'll give you a couple of very quick examples. You know, we've talked a lot about racial and ethnic diversity. So I'll switch to gender and sexual and LGBTQ piece. There is a big deal in this. You know, for example, there is a movement in Canada, which is, I mean, internationally, but Canada's taken it a little seriously, and that is the 30% club. Okay, and what the 30% club is about is all about getting more women into C-suite, so boards and CEOs of corporations. So many Canadian companies, at least the top 100, have galvanized and they have set targets. And having been an executive myself, I know exactly how it trickled down the corporation. So we had to make sure that in order to become C-suite, you got to become a VP first. Okay. So we started managing how many VPs were women. So, and then in order to become a VP, now you got to go one level below. So that is how many senior leaders who are promotable can be promoted to the thing. So how are we going to talent manage this? So let's measure it. Let's see, where is it? So you manage this whole thing, you measure it, you manage it, and you lead it to fruition. Similarly, on the LGBTQ, we needed to ensure our Black community, our indigenous population, we needed to make sure that we had a certain amount of indigenous people in our workforce and in our leadership. So therefore, what did we do? We set a target and we said, okay, that's what we got to do. So therefore, where do we start? We have to start, and we've got to start updating. So every quarter, there is an update that goes, and it goes all the way to the board, and it also goes to the shareholders. And so therefore, and the government has also got a way of capturing these stats to see what has corporate Canada done in terms of progressing in that. So I thought, I know we've got pieces on art and on humanity, but I also wanted to give you the business perspective on how does this boil down in corporations, and what are corporations really doing? To Amrita's point earlier, I love the point that she made. Miles to go before you sleep. There's no question. We have only scratched the surface of all this, and there is so much of work to be done. We are definitely, I would say that we are on the right path in terms of, and this particular festival that you have created, kudos to you guys for hosting this festival, because this is the kind of stuff that is needed for this world to truly appreciate what's going on. And this diversity of thought that we are having here and the discussions we are having is really amazing. I learned a lot as well. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. That was amazing to hear, and it's great to get all these different perspectives. Getting the perspective from a business perspective, getting it from just a human perspective, and getting it from all these different perspectives that we've learned from really help shape our overall awareness and knowledge of how we can and what we can do to keep this progress happening. Whether it is slow, but at least it's steady and the future looks optimistic. And the more conversations like this that we can keep having, the farther we are going to get on the road to an ideal place to be. So thank you so much to all of you, and for all of our panelists for being here, and everyone in the community who's here asking these hard questions, but asking these necessary questions. And actually, we have a few things here in the chat. One thing that Amrita had mentioned to your point, Venki, is what gets measured gets done. So I think that's an amazing point. Measuring is how you're going to actually have real data to know if things are progressing, how they're progressing, and what we're doing to make them progress. And I think we can take a lot away from this conversation, including look around you. If everyone looks like you, you're not in the most diverse and inclusive community that you've formed for yourself, no matter what level that's on and how wide that reaches. Also, unlearning in order to relearn, and having these conversations on a daily basis in social settings, with family, with friends, at work, having this be in the forefront of our minds, not only because it looks appealing or it's popular right now, but because it is super important and super necessary for this change to take place. And measuring this so that we can see what we're doing and see how we are doing it in order to progress. And lastly, doing this from a leadership perspective so that influencers and other leaders can shape how bring that to the new generation. So thank you so much to all of you for being here today. On behalf of the Moksha Canada Foundation and Sunil Chanan, the director and founder of the Moksha Canada Foundation, and myself and Nadia and the entire Moksha team, we would like to sincerely thank all of you for being a part of this panel discussion, for providing us with such amazing insights, and for sharing your experiences and teaching all of us what we can do and how we can do it to work towards a more inclusive, a more diverse, and more equality-filled Canada. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.